Lando Norris is finally world champion, but the real fight might only just be starting. And it's not with Max Verstappen, it's inside his own garage. After 2025, McLaren suddenly feels a lot less like two equal lions and a lot more like Lando's team. The car, the peer, the development meetings, the number one on the nose. So where does that leave Oscar Piastri, the teammate who led the championship longest? Tonight we're asking a brutal question. Did Lando's first title quietly push Piastri into second-class status for 2026? When Lando Norris climbed out of the car in Abu Dhabi as world champion, it felt like the end of a story we'd been watching for years. The nearly man finally delivering, the fan-favored underdog finally cashing in on all that raw speed and wasted potential. But inside McLaren, as the champagne dried and the photos were archived, something much bigger quietly shifted. This wasn't just a driver winning a title. It was the moment one side of the garage became the center of gravity for an entire Formula One team. And whether anyone wants to say it out loud or not, the question heading into 2026 is simple. Is McLaren now Lando's team? And what does that really mean for Oscar Piastri? On the surface, the messaging from Woking hasn't changed. Zach Brown still talks about the best driver lineup on the grid. Press releases still name-check both drivers with the same polished enthusiasm. Technically, nothing has been announced about a number one and a number two. But Formula One doesn't really work on press releases. It works on momentum, perception, and where the invisible lines of power run. A world championship has a way of drawing those lines around one driver, and in 2025, that driver finally became Lando Norris. You could see it in the days after the title was sealed. McLaren's social feeds, their sponsor activations, the internal videos from the factory, almost all of it revolved around one face. Norris walking into the boulevard with the trophy. Norris addressing hundreds of employees from a balcony, voice shaking a little as he tried to thank people he's never even met. Norris standing in front of the championship banner, number one on his chest, the car behind him lit like a museum piece. Piastri was there in the pictures, smiling, clapping, doing all the right things. But for the first time since the pair were teamed up, he wasn't the co-lead of the story. He was part of the supporting cast. That doesn't mean McLaren suddenly turned against Oscar. It's subtler than that. When a team finally produces a world champion after years of rebuilding, the instinct is to protect the formula that delivered it. Lando becomes the proof that everything they've done, the hires, the painful resets, the direction changes, was worth it. When the technical team meets to discuss next year's car, the question isn't just, what do we need to be faster? It's, what does Lando need to defend this title? When sponsors sit down to sign new deals, they don't ask for one of the McLaren drivers. They ask for the world champion. That's how a team of two equals slowly tilts around one pole, even when everyone internally swears equality still exists. The irony is that 2025 didn't feel like a dominant, crush-the-field season from the outside. Norris didn't obliterate Piastri. He didn't make Verstappen vanish. He won the title by the kind of razor-thin margin that sends statisticians and fan forums into overdrive, replaying every safety car and penalty. On pure performance, Oscar had just as many wins, stunning qualifying laps of his own, and long stretches of the year where he looked like the more dangerous man in wheel-to-wheel combat. He led the championship for longer. He took more of the sort of risks that make highlight reels and raise pulses. If you look only at the stopwatch, 2025 was the season that proved McLaren had two drivers capable of being champions, not one. But history doesn't care about lap charts. It prints one name on the trophy. And that makes a psychological difference you can't quantify with sector times. When Lando arrived at the FIA Gala as the new world champion, trophy in his hands, the entire power dynamic shifted by a few degrees. He was suddenly sitting at the table with Hamilton, Vettel, Verstappen, not as a rival, but as someone who had done what they did. Piastri, once the gritty equal on the other side of the garage, was now defined by a different label. The teammate who lost the intra-team fight, not by much, not by speed, but lost all the same. That label matters going into 2026 because of how teams typically evolve after a title. Look back at history. When Rosberg beat Hamilton in 2016, Mercedes didn't suddenly rebuild the whole organization around Nico, in part because he retired. When Button won in 2009, Braun had one magical year before morphing into Mercedes and reshaping their identity. In other cases, though, the pattern is clear. Once a driver has a title, development philosophies start to lean toward their strengths. Strategy teams become hypersensitive to their races. They become the reference. The default. Piastri now has to push against that invisible bias if he wants to be anything more than the other McLaren. Inside the garage, that pressure is sharpened by how 2025 actually played out. Oscar can look back at a list of specific wounds: the Australia off that cost big points, the Azerbaijan crash in DNF, the sprint weekends where he walked away with nothing, the Las Vegas disqualification that still stings because it wasn't his mistake. He knows that with a little more luck, a little more sharpness at key strategic moments, the title narrative could easily have been his. But sport doesn't reward almost. It rewards delivered seasons. Lando delivered the one thing teams care about more than raw speed: a complete championship year. Now, heading into 2026, Norris carries something Piastri doesn't: institutional weight. If he says the car understeers too much on entry, that feedback is heard through the filter of, "Our world champion is struggling here." If Oscar says the same thing but suggests a slightly different direction, suddenly the room has a dilemma. Whose feelings do we prioritize? In theory, the answer is both. In practice, time and resource caps mean you pick a lane. The risk for Piastri is that McLaren's lane increasingly follows Lando's driving DNA. From Lando's perspective, this is both incredibly exciting and quietly terrifying. On one hand, he has everything he ever wanted: a title, a team that trusts him, and a car that will almost certainly be shaped more and more around his preferences. On the other, he now has something to lose that he's never had before. Not just races, but status. If he stumbles in 2026, if Piastri beats him over a season in what the world now sees as Lando's team, the backlash will be brutal. The same title that raised him will be used as a stick to beat him with: world champion beaten by his teammate. Did McLaren back the wrong man? That's the double-edged sword of being the focal point. And somewhere on a Red Bull, Mercedes, or Aston Martin simulator, other drivers and team bosses are watching this dynamic with interest. They know that when a team becomes emotionally attached to one driver, the other often starts looking over the fence. Piastri's name has already floated through the rumor mill as a future target for rivals if McLaren can't keep the balance real. That doesn't mean he's packing his bags or that McLaren are pushing him out, far from it. But it does mean that the next 2 seasons could quietly decide whether this partnership becomes a long-term title-winning super duo, or the latest example of a brilliant young driver deciding that their path to a championship might be clearer somewhere else. In the middle of all this noise, it's easy to forget how much both drivers actually need each other. McLaren's resurgence wasn't built on one man carrying a broken car. It was built on 2 elite drivers pushing the team forward from different angles. Norris's consistency and calm created a stable benchmark. Piastri's aggression and willingness to live on the edge exposed the car's outer limits and forced McLaren to raise their game. Together, they turned a team that used to celebrate podium scraps into a genuine title operation. The danger now is that the natural gravitational pull of a championship distorts that balance just enough to weaken the whole. Ultimately, whether McLaren has become Lando's team will be answered not in press conferences, but on the stopwatch and in the way 2026 feels. If the car rolls out and both drivers are smiling, both fighting for wins, both praising the direction, then the narrative of internal imbalance will fade. People will say, yes, Lando is the champion, but McLaren have 2 aces and they know it. But if we start to see patterns, crucial strategy calls tilting one way, development updates suiting one style more than the other, frustrated radio messages from Oscar about being left exposed, then the story will write itself. For now, what we can say with certainty is this: Lando Norris's first world championship didn't just change his life, it changed the ecosystem he lives in. McLaren isn't just a team chasing wins anymore. It's a team responsible for defending a title, for honoring a champion, for keeping a hungry teammate motivated and valued while still leveraging the glow of their new star. Whether they can hold all of that together will decide not only if 2025 was the beginning of a Norris-led era, but also whether Oscar Piastri's future is written in papaya or in someone else's colors. And as the lights go out on the first race of 2026, there will be one subtle thing to watch beyond lap times and pit stops. When both McLarens dive into turn 1, will they look like equals fighting for the same dream? Or will it already feel like one is defending his kingdom while the other tries to prove he deserves more than a supporting role in Lando's team?